And welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we will be getting into our Week 5 wide receivers starts, sits, sleepers, and busts for the week. So we're going to do a little bit different format this week. I know we had kind of been going over rankings. We went through all of the games, but instead we're going to go focused a little bit more on some players that we really like this week, some players that we're not so hot on. And hopefully this format helps you guys if you have these players, or if if you're looking for additional trade targets, that kind of thing for Week 5, if you're 1-3 at this point, type of thing. So we're going to go over players that we are high on first, and that's going to be the starts. The first guy we're going to go with here is Brian Thomas Jr. So obviously he's coming off of a little bit of a breakout game, right, where he had 6 for 86 at a touchdown. We've talked a lot about Brian Thomas Jr. this year. So this is just continuing to add on to that because he is in a very good spot, again, to succeed here because he has taken over from Gabe Davis in terms of additional targets, right? Gabe was kind of hanging around the first couple of weeks. This felt like the breakout week where he had 9 targets. Gabe had 3 targets. He played on a lot more snaps than Gabe did. Christian Kirk has kind of stepped up into the closer to the line of scrimmage role. Brian Thomas down the field. He also had a touchdown inside the 5-yard line. So I really think the role is starting to increase here. The identity of the offense is starting to go towards him. And as that happens, I think in just all leagues, even in your 2 wide receiver, 1 flex leagues, especially in your 3 wide receiver leagues, Brian Thomas is kind of a set it and forget it starter at this point. He's still going to be ranked in ranking sets down in the low 20s, but I think that's going to have to be moving up as he continues to show that he can be consistent here. You see he's wide receiver 15 on the season already, and I think that there's just upside from there.
Yeah, and he's got a great matchup this week against Indianapolis. They've allowed the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so I think with Jacksonville needing to get a win, I think this is a good opportunity for them to do so, and especially with Evan Ingram coming back, even more of those easy checkdowns for Trevor Lawrence. Hopefully it allows the offense to operate more efficiently. But like you said, with Thomas Jr. this last week, 35% target share. His ADOT is like 15 yards. So maybe they start getting him some even shorter stuff as well, just with his big play ability, because without him being a big factor, this offense is extremely stale. So very excited about him rest of season. And for as much as we talked about in the offseason, I wish I had more of this guy. Moving over to my start of the week, we've got Amari Cooper. So right now, Amari Cooper is 6th in targets amongst all wide receivers, but is wide receiver 41 in half PPR. He did have that 82-yard touchdown called back last week, which was just brutal. He's not really playing his best football right now, right? He's dropping a lot of passes. He's not getting open at his usual rate. I do wonder if a little bit of that is effort related with just how bad Deshaun Watson has been. Maybe he's hoping for a change to Jameis Winston. Maybe he's hoping for a trade. We should be getting David Njoku back this week, which will hopefully help the offense operate a little bit more efficiently because Watson's just getting crushed behind this depleted offensive line right now. On the positive side, he gets the Commanders this week, who do not have a good defense, and the Browns should be playing from behind in this game. We've seen how good Washington looks this year, so I would expect them to be putting up points against the Browns defense.
My second guy here is likely somebody who just got off the waiver wire, so hopefully this is good to see for those of you who got him, but it's Dontayvion Wicks. With the injury to Christian Watson, he's going to be starting, and he just looks a lot better on the field, in my opinion, than Romeo Doubs. I know Doubs plays a predominant role in the offense. He plays the X, and he's going to be out there a lot. But Wicks is going to be on the field a ton. They're going to have to be throwing a lot in this game as well, just because that's kind of their identity. They're playing against the Rams, who are very beatable defense here. So again, another player that you're probably going to see down past 30 that I really think you should be starting anyways, and you should figure out a way to get him in your lineups over pretty much a lot of the players in that area. I think he's got a lot of upside in this game. I do expect him to score again after having 2 touchdowns this past week. 13 targets this last week too, so he was like very much the dominant target on the offense as the game progressed. So overall, I think Wicks has all kinds of upside. I think a top 20 finish here is very reasonable to expect.
Yeah, and he had a couple drops too, but I think the important thing was Jordan Love kept going back to him. He almost dropped that one easy layup touchdown too, but I think that yeah, we're going to see a lot out of Wicks. And I saw a stat that Fantasy Life posted where it's only a 3-game sample size, but in the 3 games where Wicks has reached a 70% route participation rate or higher, he has scored 15, 24, and 23 fantasy points in each of those. So the biggest thing with Wicks, when we talked about these Packers wide receivers in the offseason, we raved about his talent, but it was just more so playing time. Well, now he's going to get that. So very excited. Wish I would have got him off waivers in our league, but very excited about him moving forward.
I mean, you don't wish that badly. You only put a $0 bid on him. Like you knew you were getting him with a $0 bid.
My bench is, I don't know. I like my bench a lot.
Your bench is loaded.
I could pull the trigger.
I think your bench outscored your starters this week. You would have had to drop Garrett Wilson to get him, basically. So
at this point, maybe that's not a bad idea.
So, but there are a lot of teams out there that are struggling with injuries. This is an excellent Rashee Rice replacement if you're really struggling at wide receiver. If you went robust running back to start your draft and you're really looking for a guy, this is somebody that you should scoop and start. I did get him in a league, and I am planning on starting him in that league. So looking forward to seeing what he can do in this offense against the Rams this week. So your second start here is George Pickens.
Yeah, Mr. George Pickens. So he had his first game going over 100 yards this year last week. He still hasn't scored a touchdown, which is why he's only the wide receiver 38.5 PPR scoring. But he does have a 38% target share, which is just ridiculous. We know they don't really have any other pass catchers on the team besides him and, Freiermuth to a certain extent. But he's 17th in overall targets amongst wide receivers. They just don't throw the ball that often, but he's getting open at a very high rate and he's playing really well. He still kind of makes those bonehead plays from time to time. That's just kind of what you're going to have to roll with Pickens. And part of the reason he saw a spike in targets and production last week was they were in a negative game script and they had to turn it over to Fields to do more than just, pound Najee and things like that. So I think this week against the Cowboys, it could be pretty similar. Pittsburgh is actually favored by a couple points in this game, but we know Dak is going to come out throwing if he gets hot. They can get a couple scores early, and they're going to have to lean back on Justin Fields, and he's going to have more on his plate against the Cowboys defense that is not really good right now. So high hopes for Pickens in this one.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the target share, but the expanded targets per game too. I mean, he had double-digit targets last week for the first time. Yeah. I do think that Fields is settling into this offense very, very well. You saw him go over 300 yards, but he also had a big game in week 3 passing the ball. So I think Pickens just continues to trend up. Ideally, Pickens' value does not get ruined by trade for Davante Adams going to the Steelers, but we'll see how that part plays out. That's kind of lurking just in the background of all of this wide receiver conversation is where Davante Adams is going to go. Of these 4 guys, the only guy that's really in danger of being affected by that is Pickens. Going over to our sleepers. So the way we did starts, right, is those guys kind of in the 20 to 30 range that, you could possibly push up over somebody that's ranked higher than them. If you go and look, these guys are going to be much further down the list than that. And then our busts are going to be much higher than that, right? Up in the top 20. So my first guy here for sleepers is Jauan Jennings. He got just pushed way down the rankings now that everybody's back and healthy, but he still ended up with 6 targets, led the team in receiving in week 4, even with Debo back and Kittle back. Kittle's dealing with rib injury, but he's going to be, pretty steadily involved here. And Jennings, I don't think is going away. I think it's an interesting commentary on how he went 11 for 175 and 3 touchdowns. It's just hard to put that back into Pandora's box after seeing him be so productive and completely outplaying Brandon Aiyuk. And Debo's still banged up. Calf injury, only ended up missing 1 game when it was initially reported he was going to be a multi-week injury. So I don't anticipate Purdy going away from him. I don't know why he would. I don't know why the offense would just shift entirely away from him. And going up against Arizona, right, in a bad matchup, like say they were playing the Jets or the Steelers, the Bears, maybe he doesn't show up here. But against Arizona, they're going to be passing a lot. Washington just hung 42 on the Arizona defense, and just Jaden Daniels just had a clinic through the air. So, Purdy can kind of back that up. And I think Jauan Jennings is going to be a big part of that success through the air.
Yeah, I think with him, you hit the nail on the head with just why would coach or Purdy go away from him at this point. He's just playing out of his mind. And it's not like he just sort of came out of nowhere last year or this year. It's like last year during the Super Bowl, he caught a touchdown pass. He threw a touchdown pass. So obviously this team trusts him. So at this point, yeah, I'm very comfortable starting him, especially if I've got, Amon-Ra by, AJ Brown on by, guys like that.
I wish the 49ers would have just moved on from Aiyuk. They knew they had this guy, right? Just let Aiyuk go. Just get a
and they drafted a first-round wide receiver too.
Yeah, they got Pearsall. Like I just let Aiyuk walk. Like they ended up paying him $30 million a year when this guy's playing better than him. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. Whatever. I mean, I digress on that conversation. I do like Jennings this week. If you do have a deep league, you're in a 12-team league, and you, like you said, you're dealing with buys, or you have 2 or 3 flex spots in your league, Jennings is a decent play this week.
And for my sleeper, we've got Courtland Sutton. So Sutton right now is the wide receiver 44 in fantasy, but he's 5th in total targets, tied with Amari Cooper, who I talked about earlier. The issue has been Bo Nix is like the 5th lowest completion percentage amongst QBs. I don't think highly about Bo Nix at all, but he's got a great matchup against the Raiders this week, and the Broncos have not been able to run the ball effectively. So while I expect this to be a low-scoring game, Sutton has more than double amount of targets of the next leading receiver on their team, and they've got a chance to be in 3-2 after this game. And I think if they're trying to push for the playoffs this year, given how good their defense looks, I think they're going to need to continue to get Bo Nix confident. And what better way to continue to build his confidence than to pepper his number 1 receiver against a hapless, deflated Raiders team this week.
Another guy that I really like this week. He's going to show up a little bit ahead of Jennings in the rankings in general, depending on where you check rankings. But overall, I do think Sutton is somebody that I was kind of worried about over the first couple of weeks. But seeing 9 targets, seeing a score, I think just you want to hang on here. And if you're in a desperate spot, you have a lot of injuries, I think Sutton's an excellent play. For example, if I had Sutton on my team, I'm deciding between Wan'Dale Robinson and Rachaad White for my flex spot. I would probably play Courtland Sutton over both of them this week in a good matchup. Hopefully we see better production from Bo Nix in this matchup against the Raiders. All right, so going over to the negative side of the wide receivers this week, we got a couple sits each here. So my first one is Tyreek Hill. This isn't really surprising to anybody, I would hope, but you see that 91% start percentage. I think it just needs to be said that he shouldn't be in lineups at this point. It's 3 straight weeks where he's done nothing without Tua. I mean, they literally are trying to throw him the ball near the line of scrimmage. They're trying to get him involved in the running game a little bit on jet sweeps and stuff like that. Huntley had 3 opportunities to throw him 50-plus touchdowns this past week. He was open on all of them, and he would have scored on all of them if Huntley had just hit him deep. And he missed all 3 badly. One of them was on the left sideline. He underthrew it by 15 yards, to his back shoulder, when he should have thrown it down the sideline an additional 15 yards. One of them, he overthrew him actually down the right side. I couldn't believe he overthrew him. And then there was another play that I'm blanking on at this point, but it's just unfortunate, right? It's not Tyreek's fault. And if you have Tyreek, Tua is expected back in week 8. This isn't going to be like this forever. If you're losing, you might want to consider trading him to somebody that's winning and try to sell them on the rest of season upside here. But you just can't play him this week. Unfortunately, we're just in a spot where it's just way too risky to be playing him. He's going to go up against New England. They're going to be in New England. Weather's probably not going to be the greatest. So I would be sitting him, and I wouldn't sit him for Jauan Jennings necessarily, but I would definitely be considering sitting him for Dontayvion Wicks if I had just won him off the wire.
It's so tough to sit Tyreek Hill with just that potential upside, but that's, I think, like you said, 3 straight games of 5 half PPR points. Terrible. And going up against New England. Yeah. I mean, Tua's earning that contract. I mean, I'm not the biggest Tua guy, but he can operate that offense in ways that other guys cannot. So
we just saw New England, we just saw Tennessee also against Miami just run the ball down their throats. I mean, Mason Rudolph came in for Will Levis and threw for 80 yards, and Levis had 20 yards. They barely got over 100 yards as a team passing, and a lot of that was to the running backs, to Spears and to Pollard. and they put up 31 points on Miami, and Miami like never had the ball. So if New England is going to be able to do that with Gibson and Stevenson, I just am afraid that they're never even going to have the ball either. Like, it's just, I don't know. This is such a bad situation. They should have addressed their backup quarterback in the offseason. They could have got like a Jameis Winston, a Joe Flacco, like anybody that's just a skilled veteran really to kind of step in here to be better than what they're currently rolling out there.
Jameis with Tyreek Hill would be such a fun social experiment.
It just would have been. I mean, at least they could move the ball. At least they'd at least attempt to try and get the ball past the sticks. You know, 3rd and 8, they're at least throwing it past the sticks. You know, which wasn't the case. Like, at least there would be a threat down the field so that, you know, Achane would have some room to operate. This whole offense is just so disappointing right now. So Tua can't.
And he's got Christian Gonzalez too. I mean, he's shut down most of the top dogs.
Everybody.
I think Metcalf had a good game against him, but like Wilson, Aiyuk, Chase didn't even do much. But
through 4 games, he's only given up 140 yards. Gonzalez has. Like, he's been very good. So overall, again, we've belabored the point here, but I think it's important to say, like, I think I'm going to rank Tyreek Hill outside the top 25 at wide receiver this week. If you want our rankings, comment below rankings. But, you know, I just don't have a lot of faith here. All right, and your first sit is Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah, so Brandon Aiyuk, I mean, I guess this kind of correlates to, you know, the start of the week with, you know, Jauan Jennings, but Aiyuk sees like 5 targets per game, with the outlier being week 3 where he saw 10 targets with Debo and Kittle out, and he still hasn't eclipsed 50 yards in any of those games. Last week with Kittle back and Debo back, you know, Jauan Jennings still out-targeted Aiyuk. Ricky Pearsall's waiting in the wings. Hopefully he comes back healthy soon. They are at home against the Cardinals this week. Cardinals defense is not that great. We, you know, talked about what the Commanders did against them. And, you know, there's always that chance that Aiyuk has a big game just based off the talent. But I think if the game script is like a Debo and a Kittle touchdown, they get up a couple scores and then just want to pound the rock with Jordan Mason, we could be looking at easily like a 3 for 27 type of game out of Aiyuk. So I don't really want to be starting him anywhere until I see it at this point, which is unfortunate because I pushed him up the rankings to like 15 this year preseason, and he has not paid off at all.
Yeah, and I think something that you said that's important to discuss, right, is the fact that you're going to bench him until you see it. And this is a game where you could see it. And hopefully we see it because it's Arizona. Like, even if all these other guys are doing well, just like, if SF is serious about trying to get him going this year, this is the spot to do it in. So I really hope we do see a good game against Aiyuk. But like you said, if they get up and he's just not featured and they don't force the ball to him, then like I don't know that you're going to want to start him much going forward. So yeah, another guy that I in a good matchup, I would really struggle to bench him for, say, Wicks, you know. But I do think, again, this is a guy that's going to show up outside the top 25 in the rankings this week, just because I have a lot more faith in Debo being another week healthier. Kittle coming back, he should be, again, featured. It's just very crowded, and Aiyuk is the one playing worst. So
it's funny you mentioned Wicks because I have a league where Aiyuk is my number 4 wide receiver. We can start up to 4 wide receivers, and I put in a claim for Wicks that was unsuccessful. It's just kind of the old standard waiver system, and I was going to start Wicks over Aiyuk in that second flex spot.
Yeah, so it's just like, and again, in a situation like that where it's like the end of your starting roster and you have more faith in Wicks against the Rams, like, I don't blame you there. Like, it's something that you could easily be doing despite what any sort of ranking set will say. Going over to my second sit is T. Higgins. He just hasn't gotten going at all, even kind of. They gave him 10 targets last week. He turned it into 6 for 60. That is nothing to be inspired by, really. I mean, that's still less than 10 fantasy points on 10 targets. That's just super disappointing. You know, the running backs looked excellent last week. So it is going to be hard to just say, against Baltimore, like, they might not be able to run as well, but also Baltimore just completely shut down Buffalo. And so I don't know. I just don't think that this is necessarily going to be the highest scoring game, that the offense is going to be operating super successfully against Baltimore. I think Baltimore is going to be able to keep it away from Cincinnati pretty consistently because Cincinnati's defense is so bad. So this is just a situation, again, he's going to be outside my top 25 because I just don't trust the situation yet. I don't trust that he's fully up to speed at this point. And unfortunately, this isn't somebody I would even be looking to trade for. I just am not in on T. Higgins anymore.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I've got a couple leagues where I've kind of like, scouring for trades, and I look at Higgins and I'm like, I don't really know what I want to give up that would take to acquire him, because
nothing.
I
wouldn't give up Wicks.
Yeah. Like, do I really need 5 for 60? Like, if he doesn't score a touchdown, like, I don't really see that much upside here. So I'm with you with Higgins, and he was kind of one of those guys that both of you and I were kind of on our do not draft list more or less this year. So feeling a little bit validated there, but yeah,
we had him ranked really low, like wide receiver 29, I think, or something like that. And that's kind of how I feel about him. Just like whatever, I'd rather just keep whoever I have in that range. All right, going into your sit, our last sit recommendation here is Jakobi Meyers. I think there's going to be a theme with what we talk about in this one specifically, moving forward in videos just in general too.
Yeah, so with Jakobi, Davante Adams has officially requested a trade, so there's probably next to zero shot that he plays this week. And while I think Myers long term, maybe gets a little bit of boost in value, we'll see how he operates as that true number one. But this week going up against Denver, against Patrick Surtain with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback, that is just absolutely brutal. So Surtain against DK Metcalf gave up 3 for 39. Against Pickens when he was on him, 1 for 16. When he was on Evans, 1 for 8. When he was on Garrett Wilson, 1 for 12. He wasn't on those guys for every route, but he is just dominant. And overall, the Denver defense has been really good. They even held Breece Hall and Braylon Allen to 38 rush yards last week, and Raiders can't run the ball to save their lives. So I would expect, maybe Minshew just throws a couple up for grabs balls that'll probably get intercepted this week. I just don't see any path to any upside here with Myers. Side note, if you're looking for kind of a deeper sleeper in this game, or even moving forward, assuming Adams moves on, Trey Tucker, I think, could be a decent play if Surtain is all over Myers and they do likely have to throw the ball. But I think this will be kind of a gross, low-scoring game.
Yeah, and the theme that is going to come through is basically every single week we're going to feature whoever's matching up against Surtain on this list. You don't want to be playing anybody against Surtain right now. Like, that's just period. You just can't start them. So I don't know how you feel about that, but Garrett Wilson last week, I even felt that way then. I didn't play Wilson anywhere I had him, and it worked out fine because he went like 5 for 40 with a fumble. So Jakobi Meyers, we did get to look at how he's going to be utilized last week with Adams out. He did have 10 targets, 6 catches. So I think he's definitely somebody you want on roster. It's just this week, terrible matchup, and make sure he's on your bench. Going into the busts now, we each have one bust that we're going to be avoiding, and mine is Chris Olave. So he doesn't have the worst matchup here, right? He's going up against Kansas City because they're probably going to be losing this game, but Kansas City's defense has been pretty good overall. They completely shut down the Chargers in the second half last week, and they have been trying to play a little bit of ground control. Their offense is not explosive, so I don't expect this scoring to be like out of hand. And so, unfortunately, Olave is still dealing with the hamstring injury a little bit. I know he had 8 for 86, really gutsy performance to go out there after getting banged up midweek. But I just don't think necessarily that this is a week that he's going to be, blowing the roof off. I don't think he's going to score in this matchup. He's got a tough matchup, with Kansas City's top corners. So I just think overall, you're going to be starting him likely because, it's not like he has this crazy difficult matchup or whatever. I just think that he's probably going to be a bust. I do see the possibility of him having, less than 7 half PPR points.
Yeah, KC has been solid against wide receiver ones this year. McDuffie is, the real deal. They also do play press coverage more than any team in the league, which is what Rashid Shaheed actually excels at. So I think Rashid could be in for, with Shaheed, he's getting more targets than we've seen in the past, and he's obviously got that huge playability. So I like that play a little bit this week, and it does pain me to move Olave down the rankings because I will be starting him in our league, and he's one of my favorite players. But yeah, tough matchup here this week.
Yeah, and Shaheed has actually out-targeted Olave on the season too. Not that matters all that much, I don't think. But, if he is going to excel on the number 2 corner in press coverage, that, not to say that's going to take away from Olave's role. I just think it's a tough matchup here for Olave. All right, and getting into your bust, last player we're going to talk about here today is Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, so
another
one. God, another one that pains me. Another one of my favorite players. I just love my Ohio State receivers. He is the wide receiver 43 in half PPR, which is just atrocious for, first or second round fantasy pick in this year's draft. And he hasn't missed any time due to injuries, and he got Aaron Rodgers back. And they improved the offensive line. There were all these like positive signs pointing toward Garrett Wilson this year. We thought it was going to be super concentrated between him and Breece Hall. He is leading the team in targets, but Allen Lazard's got him in yardage. He's got him in touchdowns. His highest receiving game was week 1, and that was 60 yards. He has had difficult matchups with cornerbacks. He faced L'Jarius Sneed. He faced Patrick Surtain. He's faced Christian Gonzalez. Now he's got the Vikings, who are overall a good defense. They don't have one of those, lockdown corners of that caliber. And the Vikings are better against the run than the pass. So I do see a little bit of a silver lining here with them, and especially because how Vikings seem to start these games up like 14-0, no matter what. So I do think Rodgers is going to have to throw. I'm not personally benching Garrett Wilson, but I'm kind of just viewing him as like a wide receiver 3 until further notice. And I think maybe we can kind of open up the discussion about whether or not if Davante Adams gets traded to the Jets, if that's better or worse for Wilson, because I think he's a very solid player, but I don't think he's one of these like matchup proof wide receivers where he can just, beat any cornerback or even like any tier 2 cornerback. And if Davante draws those guys to him, maybe Wilson, has a little bit more space, maybe he plays in the slot a little bit more. I don't know. I'm a little bit down on him. I think there's a silver lining for this week, but it's just tough, man. He's just not been good.
Yeah, I get it. And I want to highlight too that our busts are guys that you're most likely starting, right? That's kind of the point, is that you're going to be starting them, but like the expectation is like limit your expectation for how excited you are about these guys. With Wilson, I do think that there's 2 things working in his favor this week. I think I'm going to be starting him where I have him. After benching him last week, right? I'm fortunate in that league where I have Deontay Johnson that kind of came off my bench that can take his spot. The thought with Garrett Wilson here is that the Vikings should be up early. They've been up early in every single game, and they just got absolutely torched in the 4th quarter by Jordan Love. So like if you go on Sleeper and you look at the matchup against wide receivers, like Minnesota's now in the bottom 5 against wide receivers because of how productive Wicks and Reed just were against them in the 4th quarter. So, maybe there's a little bit of tape there that Aaron Rodgers can kind of take with Wilson, and they're able to kind of scheme him looks. And as the game progresses, they kind of get some garbage time or catch up points here. So I do think that those 2 things are going to possibly help Wilson this week. I do hope that they are able to get him more involved, hopefully get him in the end zone and get him, up over 75 yards. Hopefully this will be his best output this week. But again, just a tough defense overall with Minnesota, and the Jets just look out of sorts, honestly, on offense. So and that's kind of why we have him here.
And I think they will have to play with a little bit more tempo. We know Aaron Rodgers loves to just take the clock down to 1 as much as he can, but playing from behind, he's not really going to have that luxury, or presumably playing from behind. But yeah, they need to get a little bit more creative. I don't really expect Lazard to necessarily keep this up long term. I think he's just kind of got that rapport, kind of that early season connection. They need Wilson to step up, right? Like they need him. So long term, I'm not selling Garrett Wilson because I don't think I could really get anything for him that I want. I would probably even be buying him. He's got, I think, a couple more tough matchups, but I think at the end of the year, we'll see him, not live up to his ADP. But decent wide receiver 2 is something that I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, and something we'll have to talk about in future shows will be if Adams does land here. We were talking about it earlier. Does that help or hurt him? Like, it's not like he can be any worse. So,
wide receiver 43,
might help open up the offense and really help Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, right, become a little bit more viable, a little bit more startable, or more confidence with those starts. So we'll get into that more once we have official news on Adams, but it does sound like there's progress picking up on a trade to send it to the Jets. So, all right, with that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.